The studio lights were warmer than usual, casting a soft glow over the familiar set, but something in the air felt off long before the cameras rolled. Lily Allen sat in the guest chair, legs crossed, fingers tapping lightly against her knee. She smiled when Jimmy Fallon greeted her, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. The audience cheered loudly, unaware that behind the applause, tension was already building like a quiet storm. Jimmy started the interview with easy humor, cracking a joke about Lily's latest music project. She laughed politely, offering quick, sharp replies. At first, it felt like playful banter, the kind viewers loved. But as the conversation shifted toward her public opinions and past controversies, Lily's posture changed. She leaned forward, eyes focused, voice steady but edged with something sharper. Jimmy tried to keep things light, teasing her about being, famously unfiltered. The audience laughed again, but Lily didn't. She raised an eyebrow, her smile fading. She corrected him, saying she wasn't unfiltered for attention, but because she refused to pretend. The words landed heavier than expected, and the laughter died down. Sensing the shift, Jimmy attempted to redirect, joking about social media drama and how celebrities sometimes take things too seriously. That's when Lily's fingers stopped tapping. She tilted her head and asked him, calmly but firmly, why honesty was always treated as a problem when it came from women. The question wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. A murmur rippled through the audience. Jimmy chuckled nervously, trying to smooth it over with humor, saying he didn't mean it that way. But Lily wasn't done. She spoke about interviews that twisted her words, about being reduced to headlines instead of being heard. Her voice grew stronger with every sentence, and the playful tone of the show slipped further away. The band fell quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to slow, unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Lily's words were no longer just responses, they were statements. She mentioned how talk shows often invited artists to entertain, not to speak honestly. The audience shifted in their seats, caught between discomfort and fascination. Jimmy attempted another interruption, gently raising his hand, suggesting they take a break or move on to a game segment. Lily shook her head. She said she was tired of being redirected whenever the conversation became real. Her voice never rose, but the intensity behind it made the moment feel explosive. A producer off-camera gestured urgently, signaling Jimmy to regain control. He tried again, this time more firmly, reminding Lily of the show's format. That was the moment something snapped. Lily laughed, short and humorless, and said the format was exactly the problem. She pointed out that authenticity didn't fit neatly into pre-planned segments. The audience was silent now. Every word echoed. Lily spoke about being invited onto shows only when she was convenient, when her opinions could be packaged safely. She said she agreed to come because she believed this would be different. The disappointment in her voice was unmistakable. Jimmy's smile was gone. He leaned back slightly, choosing his words carefully, but his tone had changed. He said the show was meant to be fun, not confrontational. Lily replied that fun shouldn't require silence. The exchange was no longer an interview, it was a standoff, polite on the surface but burning underneath. A commercial break cue flashed, but Lily kept speaking. She talked about artists being treated like props, about how women were labeled difficult for refusing to play along. Her hands moved now, emphasizing each point, her eyes locked on Jimmy's. The moment felt raw, unscripted, and impossible to ignore. Jimmy finally stood up, attempting to laugh it off, saying they'd clearly hit a nerve. Lily stood too. The movement alone drew gasps from the audience. She said it wasn't a nerve, it was exhaustion. Years of smiling through discomfort, of being expected to perform gratitude instead of honesty. The producer's voice crackled through Jimmy's earpiece, sharper now. He nodded slightly, then turned back to Lily. He thanked her for coming but suggested they wrap things up. The words were polite, but the message was clear. Lily looked around the studio, taking in the silent crowd, the bright lights, the faces frozen in shock. She said one last thing, calmly, clearly, that moments like this were why conversations never changed. Then she picked up her jacket from the chair. The audience erupted, some clapping, others stunned. Jimmy stood still, unsure whether to follow or speak. As Lily walked toward the exit, the cameras caught her expression, not angry, not triumphant, but resolved. The band didn't play her out. The lights dimmed slightly as the show cut abruptly, leaving viewers at home staring at their screens, wondering what they had just witnessed, and knowing this was only the beginning of a much bigger conversation. the studio cut to commercial, but the energy in the room didn't fade with the lights. Crew members moved quickly, whispering into headsets, their eyes darting between Lily's empty chair and Jimmy, who remained standing center stage. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, boo, or simply wait. It felt as though everyone had collectively stepped into a moment they weren't meant to see. Backstage, Lily walked briskly down the hallway, heels echoing sharply against the polished floor. A producer hurried after her, calling her name, asking if she'd be willing to talk privately. Lily stopped near a dressing room door, turned slowly, and listened. Her face was calm, but her jaw was set. She said she'd said everything she needed to say on camera. There was nothing left to smooth over. Inside the control room, monitors replayed the last seconds before the cut. Executives debated whether to resume the show as planned or address what had just happened. Some argued it would blow over by morning. Others knew better. Moments like that didn't disappear. They multiplied. When the show returned from break, Jimmy was back in his seat, posture stiff, smile carefully reconstructed. He addressed the audience, thanking them for their patience and making a brief comment about unexpected moments on live television. He didn't mention Lily by name. The band played a soft transition, and the next segment began, but the mood never recovered. The laughter was thinner, delayed, as if everyone was still processing the earlier exchange. Online, the reaction exploded within minutes. Clips circulated rapidly, cropped and replayed from every angle. Some viewers praised Lily for refusing to be redirected, calling her honest and fearless. Others criticized her, accusing her of hijacking the show. Hashtags formed, opinions hardened, and the moment took on a life of its own. Lily, meanwhile, sat in the back of her car, phone buzzing nonstop. She didn't look at it. She stared out the window at the passing city lights, replaying the conversation in her mind. She didn't regret what she said, but she knew the cost. Speaking plainly always came with one. She wondered how many people watching had felt the same frustration but never had the platform to voice it. The next morning, headlines were everywhere. Some framed it as a meltdown, others as a confrontation, a few as a long overdue reckoning. Publicists issued statements filled with careful language. Creative differences, miscommunication, live television, unpredictability. None of it captured what it felt like in that moment, under those lights. Jimmy arrived at the studio early, quieter than usual. He watched the clips alone in his office, arms crossed. He wasn't angry, but he was unsettled. Late-night television thrived on control, timing, rhythm. What had happened disrupted all of that. And yet, a part of him understood why it had resonated. The show thrived on authenticity, but only within boundaries. Lily had stepped outside them. By afternoon, Lily broke her silence with a short post. She didn't attack the show or Jimmy. She simply wrote about being tired of shrinking herself to fit expectations, about conversations being redirected when they became uncomfortable. She ended by saying discomfort wasn't always a bad thing. The post was shared tens of thousands of times. Industry insiders weighed in. Some applauded her courage. Others warned quietly that producers wouldn't forget. Invitations could dry up. Doors could close. Lily knew that too. But she also knew how exhausting it was to keep smiling just to remain welcome. Days later, the moment was still being discussed on talk radio, in think pieces, on panels debating authenticity versus professionalism. It became symbolic of something larger than one interview. Artists, hosts, audiences all asking where the line really was. Lily returned to her routine, writing music, spending time away from cameras. In interviews that followed, she refused to rehash the incident in detail. She said she'd rather talk about the ideas behind it than the spectacle itself. That answer frustrated some reporters and impressed others. Jimmy eventually addressed it more openly during a monologue weeks later. He spoke about live TV being unpredictable and about listening, really listening, when someone feels unheard. He didn't apologize outright, but he acknowledged that not every moment needed a punchline. The audience applauded, sensing sincerity beneath the jokes. The story slowly shifted from outrage to reflection. Fans began sharing their own experiences of being talked over, redirected, labeled difficult. The clip became less about a clash and more about a pattern people recognized. For Lily, the night remained vivid. Not as a scandal, but as a line she'd finally stopped crossing for others. She hadn't planned to walk off a show. She hadn't planned to make headlines. She had simply refused to retreat. Months later, when asked if she'd ever return to late-night television, she smiled and said she would, under the right circumstances. Ones where conversation didn't have to be safe to be allowed. Where honesty wasn't treated like a disruption. The moment faded from daily news, but it left a quiet imprint. A reminder that even on stages built for laughter, truth could still interrupt. And sometimes, walking away said more than staying ever could.